find that a lot of Christians don't want to deal with this subject because it is a disturbing subject. They would just prefer to use the ostrich technique, dig a hole, stick the head in, pull the dirt in on you, and hope that they go away and that they don't bother us. But many people that have studied it, and I'm not talking about, strange, weird people running around with Spock ears, doing a Klingon handshake, saying, "May the Force be with you," okay? I'm talking about scientists, very well-educated scientists have studied it extensively and have indeed concluded that UFOs are indeed a real phenomenon. Now, during the 40s and 50s, the majority of people believed that UFOs were simply nuts and bolts craft from another planet, another star system. That was the prevailing view. But in the last couple of decades, the scientists that have taken a real serious look at the UFO phenomenon have come to a rather startling conclusion. They have noticed that UFOs behave in ways that cannot be explained if these were physical ships. For example, many UFOs have been noted to materialize and dematerialize before people's eyes. They're there, and then they're gone. It's not a matter of flying away. It's a matter of dematerializing or materializing directly in front of people. They've also been noted to morph or to change shape directly in front of witnesses. Many UFOs have been clocked at over 20,000 miles per hour. Now, the space shuttle, when it lands, it comes in at about 17,000 miles an hour, and it starts to burn up. That's why they have to put tiles on the bottom, because the friction is so intense that it causes physical objects to burn up, and yet UFOs are able to travel at incredible speeds according to being clocked on radar and other methods, and yet they do not burn up, indicating to many that they are not physical objects. Many have also been seen to perform right-angle turns at speeds of up to 15,000 miles an hour. Now let's say you and I this afternoon get in your car, and we get it up to 15,000 miles an hour, okay? And then you decide to make a 90-degree right-angle turn, okay? You and I are going to become subatomic particles, okay? You will not be able to recognize. There will not even, dental charts won't even help. And yet UFOs have been seen to travel at those types of speeds and make right-angle turns. They also do not cause sonic booms, which is also something that you would not expect for a physical object. And they also make incredibly quick starts and stops, also impossible for physical objects. If you and I were traveling 65 miles an hour and we made a stop and went from 65 to 0 in, say, 3 feet, we would be dead. We'd be recognizable. Dental charts might be helpful, but we would be dead. And yet UFOs make extremely fast starts and stops impossible for physical objects. Also, UFOs have been seen to break up into multiple UFOs, or multiple UFOs have been seen which can merge into a single object. Now, this behavior has disturbed a number of scientists, and they've commented on it extensively in the last 20 years. Physicist James Campbell, writing in SCP Journal 1977, page 14, stated that evidence left at landing sites leaves little room that UFOs are heavy, ponderous objects when addressed. Yet, in flight, their startling departures, sudden stops, and right-angle turns at high speed require them to be virtually massless, because a physical object could not do these things. John Keel, another gentleman that's been researching UFOs for about 4 decades, wrote a book called Operation Trojan Horse in 1973. And on page 182, he said this: "The statistical data which I have extricated indicate that flying saucers are not stable machines requiring fuel, maintenance, or logistical support. They are, in all probability, transmogrifications of energy, and do not exist in the same way that this book exists. They are not permanent constructions of matter." Transmogrification is something which is able to change its shape. Transmogrify. That's John Keel. Jacques Vallée, in 1988, wrote a book called Dimensions. And on page 231 and 232, he stated this. He had just listed in his book a number of sightings that betrayed behavior of unusual behavior, the unusual physics of UFOs. And he said this: Consider what these sightings have in common. In each case, the so-called spacecraft did not disappear by moving away, even at high speed. It simply vanished on the spot. Or it slowly faded away like a Cheshire cat, sometimes leaving behind a whitish cloud. Sometimes also producing a sound of an explosion. In other cases, UFOs have been reported to enter the ground. I hardly need to point out that this behavior is contrary to what physical objects do and quite impossible to duplicate with our current spacecraft technology. Jacques Vallée in 1988. Physicist Jacques Lemaitre, writing in Flying Saucer Review, Volume 15, on page 23, also talked about the unusual physics of UFOs. He said, "We can consequently conclude that it is impossible to interpret the UFO phenomenon in terms of material spaceships as we conceive of the latter. That is, in terms of manufactured, self-propelled machines retaining their material nature and their mechanical structure to travel from one solar system to another by traversing the distance separating these systems in the Einsteinian continuum." He means space. In other words, these are not physical craft coming here from another planet somewhere. They are behaving like supernatural or interdimensional phenomenon. J. Allen Hynek, again the head of astronomy at Northwestern University, wrote a book called UFO Report, August 1976. I'm sorry, no, this is a periodical, UFO Report, August 1976. And he said this, speaking about the superphysics of UFOs. He said, "Another peculiarity is the alleged ability of certain UFOs to dematerialize. There are quite a few reported instances where two distinctly different UFOs hovering in clear sky will converge and eventually merge into one object." So he's speaking about their ability to merge and their ability to materialize and dematerialize. Now, J. Allen Hynek, again, was a skeptic. He did not believe in UFOs. He thought they were the realm of the lunatic fringe when he started studying this phenomenon. This quote has already been there. And Jacques Vallée sums it up in his book Dimensions in 1988 on page 252 and 253. He asks this question: "If they are not spacecraft, what else could UFOs be? What research framework can account for the physical effects, for the impact on society, for the appearance of the occupants, and for the seemingly absurd, dreamlike elements of their behavior? How can we explain that the phenomenon makes itself obvious in rural populations, but avoids overt contact, choosing instead to deliver its message in bizarre abductions, in highly strange incidents? The theory that suggests itself as we analyze and reanalyze the forces at play goes beyond the notion that these are simply technological vehicles produced by an advanced race on another planet. Instead, I believe that the UFO phenomenon represents evidence for other dimensions beyond space-time. The UFOs may not come from ordinary space, but from a multiverse which is around us, which is all around us, and of which we have stubbornly refused to consider the disturbing reality in spite of the evidence available to us for centuries. Such a theory is required in order to explain both the modern cases and the Chronicles of Magonia. Chronicles of Magonia is the stories of all of these things that occurred in ancient history that he recorded in his book, Passport to Magonia. He says the abductions and the psychic component. He says that such a theory is required in order to explain both the modern cases and the Chronicles of Magonia, the abductions and the psychic component. I believe that there is a system around us that transcends time and it transcends space. Other researchers have reached the same conclusion. Now, Vallée has not been well received by a lot of scientists because Vallée and the men like him who've come to this conclusion are opening up the very disturbing possibility that UFOs and their occupants are not from another planet, but they are from another dimension. And that option opens up the possibility that we may be dealing with a spiritual, possibly demonic realm as opposed to simple aliens from another planet. Gordon Creighton, the director of the Flying Saucer Review publication, a British publication, wrote a position statement in 1996. He said this: "There seems to be no evidence yet that any of these craft or beings originate from outer space. The whole phenomenon involves a mass of features that conflict with modern science, and many researchers now believe that more than one type of being may be involved, some of them originating from outer space and some of them from an interdimensional nature, and consequently possibly from some unknown aspect of our own world." In other words, they may be among us, they may be among us, but we may not be able to perceive them because they're in another dimension, which is exactly what you find with the nature of angels and demons, etc.